Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, welcome to Coleman Report Live. Happy Monday, SBA
Happy
lenders.
Monday.
Good to be here. I've got my good friend John Reosti from American Banker on with us. We're going to talk about some fun topics. The first topic, John, we have a continuing resolution, and many SBA lenders, John, were burning the midnight oil last week, trying to push SBA loans through and getting an approval number in case of a government shutdown. You know, I would note, John, having worked at the SBA and having worked in this industry for a long time, it seems like there's a threat of a government shutdown pretty frequently. But we averted it. What do you think is going to happen next with this, John?
Well, I'll rush out on a limb and make a prediction. And in 45 days, I'll either be proven right or stupid. I'm probably stupid to make a prediction, but I'll go ahead. I think that within this 45 days, maybe within the last 5 of the 45, they will come to the lawmakers will come to some sort of arrangement for fiscal 2024. I think both parties just see that there is just not a lot to be gained by a shutdown, and I think it would be very difficult for a minority within a I don't know how you could characterize the Republican Party, because they have a slight majority in the House, and they're pretty much neck and neck in the Senate too. But a minority within that group, fiscal conservatives as well as conservatives, really wanted to make a point that the government is spending too much. But I just don't think there's enough desire to emphasize that point with any type of shutdown. And you could make an argument that the bill that ultimately passed and was signed by the president at really the 11th hour was probably less attractive than it could have been. Had there not been the shutdown drama. But I just don't think there's enough support and enough desire on anyone's part, except for that small minority of very fiscally conscious Republicans to risk a shutdown.
Well, John, having been in this industry for more than 30 years, I can remember the days. It was back during the Reagan administration. During the Reagan administration, it wasn't a government shutdown. They were proposing to eliminate SBA back then. And we had to go out to every small business that we could find and have them reach out to their congressperson to make sure SBA continued to exist. That's not been the case in a long time, and I don't think it ever will be the case again. But the threat of a government shutdown seems to be a ongoing thing that we deal with frequently as SBA lenders.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because the Reagan years are sort of a watershed for SBA. Just like you said, there was a real push, at the highest levels of government, the Office of Management and Budget and David Stockman, to eliminate SBA. But at the same time, the seeds were being planted within the agency through rulemaking, for the programs that have led to the success today, and that is the PLP and SBA Express and all of the great partnership effort that's developed, where banks that are really committed to SBA can responsibly lend on their own, and the SBA will provide the guarantee. And the agency now, it's like I think they were doing like $4 billion a year of loans back then, and this year they closed with $27 billion. So even adjusted for inflation, it's a much bigger, more important agency.
And John, back when they were threatening to do away with the agency, it was a time of direct lending. And I think a lot of times SBA did a brilliant thing. They brought bank partners into the fold, and so they broadened their base of support. And over time, we've seen other things occur, like the administrator of SBA being a cabinet level position, which certainly strengthens and elevates SBA's stance on the Capitol Hill. But guys, I'm with John. I think they'll put it together and they will get a budget passed within the next 45 days. Although, John, there have been occurrences of multiple continuing resolutions too.
Well, that's not the best way to budget, but it is one way to budget. I just think whether it's a series of 5 or 6 continuing resolutions, and I can remember years where I remember thinking, why don't they, what's the point of passing a permanent budget with this little time left? But
John,
I think
you froze.
John.
Okay. All right. So let's move on. Hopefully we'll get John back in just a moment. On Friday, Delaney reported about a House committee meeting with the private sector trying to determine a way for fraudulent PPP borrowers to return.
However they do it, I just don't think that there is an appetite for a shutdown. The composition.
I think his audio might be trying to catch up with us. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Please
but just continuing on, Delaney reported about the House committee meeting with the private sector to try to find a way to get some of the fraudulent pandemic loan funds returned. And it's some of the things, one of the things Delaney shared with me that was talked about is a potential amnesty program on PPP loan borrowers who have committed fraud. If they return the loan funds that they got it fraudulently, that they would receive amnesty. Are you back with us, John?
I'm back with you. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, we moved to the second report, John. The House committee met with a lot of private sector members to talk about a way to get them to return pandemic loan fraud funds. And with such a significant, approximately $200 billion in fraud in the pandemic lending programs, one of the things they talked about, John, was a amnesty program for PPP loan borrowers to, if they return the funds, they eliminate the possibility of being prosecuted. Pretty interesting concept. What do you think about that, John?
I think amnesties have worked in a lot of cases. They've been used in other instances. The IRS certainly has used it. And it could very well work here. I just wonder if they will be, more explicit in what they mean by fraud, because there have been some obvious cases of fraud that no one would disagree with. But when you look at the 2021 borrowers and the very small dollar borrowers, I think it becomes a little murkier. Questions of fraud, and I just hope that it doesn't scare people who got relatively small loans into doing something that maybe they didn't need to do.
Well, and we talked about this, John, and I've worked PPP servicing at a very significant level. The 2020 PPP typically was a business who had employees who had financial statements, payroll reports, and so forth. The 2021 was your independent contractors, Schedule C filers, and sole proprietors, very different types of borrowers. So coming up with creative ways to get people who fraudulently got pandemic funding is a smart idea to recover from this. I think John's frozen again. The other thing that I wanted to mention, my daughter Delaney writes Fraud Friday, and this report indicated the SBA Inspector General said there's over 100 years worth of fraud casework that they're going to have to investigate on loans that have been flagged with fraud. So we'll be dealing with and hearing about pandemic loan fraud for a long time. But I think it's good that they're talking about and discussing the possibility of being more efficient at getting loan fraud money returned. John, the third thing that we wanted to chat about, sorry, John, is SBA's year. The end of the year, SBA had a huge year. John, tell us about it.
Well, they did, and there was certainly quite a lot of activity towards the end of the year. But the agency has put out the I guess you'd call them raw final numbers. It's only the second day of the new fiscal year, but $27.5 billion was the final 7A tally. And as I had mentioned in my story last week, a lot of the established lenders had very big years with substantial advances. I didn't focus on Live Oak in there because they're such a big lender. It's hard for them to drive big numbers off of the very big number that they do. But they finished the year with in excess of $1.8 billion of volume, which is a record for them. And last year it was just under 1.7. So, 100 plus billion or million rather, more lending dollars. But, it's obviously a big year, but it's a relatively small increase just because, they are who they are and they do what they do.
John, it's not been that long ago since we celebrated the fact that an individual institution hit the $1 billion mark. How many do we have now, John? There's several others.
There are three. There's Huntington, which was just under $1 billion last year and is now at, I believe, just under $1.4 billion. So they had a very significant year increase. New Tech also, and they had a very unusual year where for part of the year they were SBIC, and part of the year, the lion's share of the year, they were a bank. But when you put them together, it's I believe it's right around 1.3 billion. And wow. I know I saw today they put out a release saying their I don't know what fiscal quarter it is, but the last quarter of the fiscal year for them that ended September 30th was their best quarter ever in terms of SBA production. So they seem to be prospering.
An interesting thing that's happened over the years, John, is especially when we have the threat of a government shutdown, SBA lenders are rushing to put loans in. And quite often the first few weeks of the next fiscal year, there's kind of a slowdown. But I don't think that's going to happen this year, John, because we have no guarantee fee on SBA loans under $1 million and no ongoing fee on SBA loans under no upfront fee on loans under $1 million and no ongoing fee on those same loans. So, John, I think SBA lenders are going to hop right back in the saddle and continue to produce at incredible levels. It was a big year last year, John, and I think this year shapes up to be even better.
I do too. We always talk about the fact that the number of SBA lenders stays about the same, somewhere around 1,500 banks and credit unions make at least one SBA loan, with the very large proportion of those making just a handful. But I think that there is, within that 1,500, there is an increase in companies that are making this, I like to call a line of business, but that are making this a significant part of their business model. And I just did a story on another one the other day that's going to do it, and I think more will. And maybe not every one of those 1,500 lenders it does a big volume of SBA loans, and just the opposite. Most of them don't, but a growing number. It gets a little bit bigger every year. It seems are doing very large volumes, significant volumes of SBA lending, like 100 million or more. And doing 100 loans or more a year. So
yeah, that's incredible, John. We always appreciate having you on Mondays, John. It's good to chat about things on the Hill and related to SBA. We thank you very much for being here. All right, looks like we have a question, guys. If a lender has a PPP loan that was denied for forgiveness and the borrower filed an appeal, can a lender defer payments until SBA makes a decision? or should they just request a guarantee? Lisa, that's a great question. If the forgiveness was denied and the borrower filed an appeal, the loan is on deferment until a decision on that appeal is made. However, as a SBA participant lender, you want to make sure you know when they filed the appeal, because within 90 days, at the 90-day mark after they filed their appeal, if SBA has not decisioned it, you as an SBA participant lender can go ahead and submit for the guarantee purchase, even though there's an appeal in process, and get paid on that SBA guarantee. So two parts, Lisa. One, if they're on appeal, yes, payments are deferred. You're not expected to collect payments on that PPP loan. But again, if they file an appeal, make sure you get the date that they filed the appeal. If it's on appeal for more than 90 days and a decision has not been made, you can then submit a guarantee purchase on that. And when you submit your guarantee purchase, there's a drop-down box for the reasons that you can submit a guarantee purchase, and one has been on appeal for X number of days or more. So that's the answer for that question. Let's go ahead. There's a great webinar that's coming up on October the 3rd. Our good friend John Winnick, who puts out the BAM report, has put this together. He's got a great team of speakers. Joshua Siegel, Amra Gill, and Jim McAlpin that are going to help us look at the state of bank deposits. We talked the other day, John, an interesting statistic. In the history of banking, we have had the first decline in deposits. They track that on a quarterly basis, but we had the first decline in the entire history of tracking those deposits, which I found to be pretty interesting, especially given the fact that the rates on deposit accounts. What do you think about that, John?
I'll be interested to see the the follow-up numbers to that, because there were some very shocking things that happened earlier this year that may have shaken people's trust in the system. But I think maybe the industry has proven that was very localized, that there were it was a very unique set of circumstances involving those banks, and that the vast majority of institutions just are safe and sound. And a lot of them, even though the overall number went down, a lot of community banks, a lot of banks in general, are reporting increases. So there's a lot of movement.
Yes, it was just an interesting, I know the Silicon Valley and the other banks that had problems kind of shook the faith of the depositors. But like you said, vast majority of banks are doing the right thing and operating very efficiently and profitably. And I don't think there's a problem. I think we'll see those deposits tick back up. Also, guys, make sure and sign up for this webinar on October the 3rd. On October the 4th, we're going to talk about the new SOP 5057-3 and the changes in that. The great thing, we're going to talk about the new uniform purchase package. That was the biggest change in the SOP 5057-3. And I always like teaching servicing webinars. So make sure, guys, and sign up for that webinar on October the 4th. We also, on October 18th, have a webinar, SBA's Do What You Do rule, updated for both of the new SOPs. Hope you guys take the opportunity to sign up for that as well. And if you ever have questions on SBA lending, you can submit those to Bob at Coleman Report, Lance at ColemanReport.com, or Mike at ColemanReport.com, and we're always happy to answer those. John, thank you for being on today. I hope it's a great Monday for everybody on the show, and go out and have a great week, my good SBA friends. Thank you very much.
Yeah.